Hey everybody, this is Eve West. Thank you for tuning into my YouTube channel. This channel is dedicated to promoting a book I wrote. It's called Follow. My book is about spirituality, but looking at spirituality from a not just a metaphysical aspect or a psychological aspect, but also an earthly aspect as well. Like I say in all of my videos, or most of my videos, spirituality is normally looked at in a very psychological way. About love and caring and sharing and that type of thing. But spirituality is much more than that. You can think of a human being as a demigod. We're not just spiritual, we're also earthly. And so when we descend into this realm, which has now devolved into hell, that's why we say hello. But when we actually descend into a mind and a body, we're forced to play an avatar from our right or left brain, either a feminine or a masculine aspect of ourselves. And so it's important to be conscious. And, when you listen to the New Age, although I don't really promote the New Age movement, but I do promote consciousness. And so the New Age always advocates consciousness, being aware, if you will, and doing introspection and having connection with this other aspect of yourself, with unconscious aspects of yourself. And so, although the New Age promotes this, it actually facilitates an environment that actually works against you becoming conscious. But I work to expose the different lies of the New Age, and I pretty much put light on various aspects of the constructs of the matrix that uphold the false ego, so we can actually, not fall victim, if you will, to the traps of this matrix system, is what I call it. Each of my videos are dedicated to, just dedicated to giving you some prior knowledge about the previous chapter. Because a lot of the topics I talk about are very controversial. They're about sex and race and money. And so, these various topics, they're very touchy. People don't like to really talk about them. And so, I didn't really want people just to go ahead and read the book. I want people to hear my voice and just to get some prior knowledge about my perspective in a way before you kind of paint your perspective on the various topics that I explore here. This particular chapter is called Fidelio. It's called Fidelio, which means faithfulness. And so, this particular chapter is about marriage. It's about marriage. And, in the whole institution of marriage, but, taking it from just a pure superficial way. Because typically when we think about marriage, we think about, a man and a woman, and, a ceremony where, people are, coming together, families are coming together, and, this man and this woman are creating this new life together. But when we think about marriage in a metaphysical, occult standpoint, in a way, I don't like to use occult, but I think it's important to use it here in this instance. Occult is actually like a hidden knowledge, and so the true knowledge of marriage is something much different than what we really think. And so, I want to focus a little bit here on mortal marriage. Okay, I want to focus on mortal marriage because mortal marriage is oftentimes fails in the demiurge, in the matrix. Oftentimes people get married and then eventually it ends in divorce. And even if people aren't divorced, if they stay together, a lot of times, they're not truly happy, if you will. And so, when you're not truly happy, you think to yourself, what's the point? What's the point in getting married? People don't necessarily want to talk about it, but the institution of marriage is not, from a feminine perspective. I know the things I'm going to say about marriage in this video are going to ruffle people's feathers, if you will. Especially if you don't have like a if you don't have insight, or if you're playing an avatar that does not have insight into the whole institution of marriage and what it really means, then it's gonna be an issue. But the feminine perspective, like I said, I play avatar from a very feminine psychic perspective. And so the way that I see marriage is different than other people see it. So I totally understand it. And in fact, I see marriage the way that everyone sees it, but this is just the limited perspective that I'm putting on the institution of marriage, if you will. So, we think of mortal marriages, We really see that marriage is very conditional. It's very conditional. You have vows. You think to yourself, well, why, people are saying I love my husband or my wife unconditionally, but you don't love your husband or wife unconditionally because you have vows. You take a vow, and so you say all the things, I vow to be faithful and this, that, and the other. And so really it's a contract, although we put a pretty face on it. It's a contract. And if you look at, various state statutes about marriage, you can have your marriage annulled if you don't consummate the marriage. You don't sleep with your spouse. You don't sleep with your husband. And so, taking a step back and looking at that more objectively, what are we really saying about love? What are we really saying about that? If you don't sleep with me, then, or have sex with me, copulate with me, then we're not married. And so that's very conditional. And, when we think about what true love is, true love is not, conditional. When I think about true love, I think about the love between a mother and a child, because, a mother sees her child as an extension of herself. It's like an arm or a leg, if you will. So, a mother won't tell a child, you have to do this or do that in order for me to love you and to stay with you. It's not contractual. And so the reason why, from a feminine perspective, mortal marriages don't work, because it is a contract, and a contract is not normal. It's not natural. And so, people, especially given the psychological programming that we receive in the Matrix, marriages oftentimes they don't survive. They don't survive because we are, at war with ourselves. And the reason why we're at war with ourselves is because, the Matrix actually is designed to create psychological splits, if you will, within a human being. And so, like, say for example, your husband, you get married to your wife, and you have the best of intentions from a spiritual standpoint of staying faithful. But, when you're bombarded with imagery on television, like, with sex, if you will, and you're always bombarded with images of women that have these perfectly chiseled bodies, and they're the picture of perfection, but your wife doesn't look like that. Your wife doesn't look like a Victoria's Secret model, and so your unconscious, which is the part of you that covets that Victoria's Secret model, will start to get angry with you to say, hey, we want that, I want that Victoria's Secret model. I don't want this woman that I'm with. And so, you don't really realize that you're doing this unconsciously. It's not a conscious thing. The id, which is a conglomeration of, in Freudian psychology, it's a conglomeration of unmanifested desires and tendencies and things like that. But as we don't consciously, it doesn't consciously register to us that we are coveting. But every day we are coveting, and so your astral self covets. If you're watching a television program and we're bombarded with a lot of I guess what you would call, we're bombarded with a lot of products, if you will, that's being advertised to us. And, although we don't say to ourselves, man, I wish I could have that, but I don't have all the money to purchase, these things that are being shown to me, your unconscious is actually looking at that stuff and, and actually has access to those things on the astral realm. And so, whenever you are, looking at something that involves sex and, you're seeing, women and all these different things, it affects your psyche. And so, if you are married and, you definitely, when you look at your spouse from an unconscious standpoint, you see a lack. You see a lack there. And because you see a lack, it oftentimes causes issues, if you will, in the marriage. And so, when we look at marriage and the institution of marriage and how you can have your marriage annulled if you don't sleep with your spouse, and how sex is something that's very, fundamental to the marriage itself. You realize that, a wife is not necessarily what we think of as a wife in the Matrix. Really, if you're saying I have to sleep with you, to receive love from you, you're saying that, basically I'm a glorified whore. you know that's what it is. I'm a glorified whore. I dress up in a nice beautiful white wedding dress, and everyone comes to the ceremony, and they give gifts, and they throw rice, and that type of thing, and they we say our vows, and all is well and good. But you have to have sex with me. And if I say I'm not going to have sex with you, then it's like, well, the deal is off. You can't be my wife and not have sex or copulate with me. And so, really, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. And so we paint a pretty picture of something that's not necessarily pretty. And so I think that's why in ancient times a lot of marriages survived, because marriage is not something necessarily about love. Oftentimes, like in ancient times, people had arranged marriages, and it was based upon compatibility, and based upon the needs of the family, the dowry and all that stuff. So it was wasn't necessary. It was business. Marriage was about business. And so we've made marriage about love, if you will. And when you look at the institution of marriage from a fundamental perspective, it's not really about love. Oftentimes, especially back in the day, you were contracting to give sex so you could have stability, monetary stability as a woman. And, this is pretty much what you did. You didn't, you weren't given rights to work, and, as men did, you weren't given equal rights per se. And so you needed a man, and a man needed you. A man worked, and so he needed someone to take care of home, and, and you needed money. And so, the way that we look at mortal marriages and how we paint a pretty picture of marriage, really just kind of gets away from the integrity of it, if you will, and the contractual nature, how it's a contract. And love is, when you read first, I think it's First Corinthians, and it talks about love, it does not sound anything like mortal marriages, if you will. Oftentimes, like when a husband and a wife have a fight or something like that, they will withhold their love from the other one, and act in very, just negative ways towards the other, because of something that they did or said. But, a mother will never withhold her love from her child. That's just not how, how it works, you can even get mad at your child, but you love them unconditionally. And so, I just want to put it out there that mortal marriage from a feminine Eve perspective is not true love. It's not true love. It's synthetic. It's a contract. It's a law. And so anything that's a law is a restriction. And so I think that's why so many people go outside of the marriage, because they feel so restricted. And so whenever you're putting yourself in restriction and you're putting yourself in a law, it's your natural inclination to go outside of the marriage. And I'm not like condoning adultery here. I'm just talking from a spiritual standpoint, if you will. If you contract to do something, as long as you didn't do it under coercion, to me, it's fine. But, but when you look at how the soul is supposed to be limitless, and it's supposed to feel limitless in expressing its love, and if you put it into a restriction, especially within an environment that facilitates psychological splits, where you're always faced with temptations and things like that in your psyche, that creates destruction. That creates destruction because you're working against yourself. You're working against your nature. And so, some people may say, oh, you're condoning adultery, if you will. But, although most people are married, many people, they cheat, you know, and a lots of marriages end in divorce. And, you know, just from my experience, you know, because I'm divorced, and, you know, from people, you know, married couples that, you know, that my ex-husband and I knew of, you know, if they were married, they were not very happy. And, even younger people. And then, you know, our single friends were not happy because they wanted, you know, that stability of being in a marriage. And so it's kind of like an all or nothing. You're single, it's like nothing. You know, marriage is all, but you don't want, you know, everything eventually. And then, you know, if you don't have anything, you want something. So, you know, marriage in and of itself is not necessarily, I guess, honored in the way that it was originally intended. So I really want to talk about that in this you know, just kind of get the whole mortal marriage aspect out the way. And so really when we think about when we're examining marriage in the occult aspect, I don't like to use occult, but in this case I think it's more fitting. In the occult aspect of marriage, it has to do with the mind. It has to do with the mind. And so when it comes to the mind, there's three separations of the mind. You have the right brain, the left brain, and then the middle. And so your right brain is, if in Christian theology, your right brain is Eve, or in like Egyptian mythology, whatever you consider your right brain to be, Isis, whereas your left brain is Ra in Egyptian mythology, or Adam in Christian theology. So the Christianity is my programming, so that's why I use that. And then you have that separation between the left and right, between Ra and Isis, or Adam and Eve, and this is the Christ. And so the Christ is supposed to actually, it's not a separation, the Christ is supposed to unite the two together in holy matrimony, but you have a separation by Satan. And so Satan is the devolved aspect of the pineal gland. It is the debased Saturn, if you will. So Saturn is the Greek god of the material. And so we're fed such materialism, if you will, you know, with the various constructs of the matrix, that it separates Ra and Isis, or Adam and Eve. And so, you know, within this particular environment, which we call Eden, I'm going back to a previous chapter I wrote in the book called Eden, it actually, you know, sex and money and religion, all these different things actually separate the left and the right brain. And, you know, people could refer to this as the 7 deadly sins, if you will. But everywhere we turn, our consciousness is bombarded with, you know, with Satanism, with stuff, if you will. And I've talked about in previous chapters and videos how the pentagram, the 5-pointed star, is, you know, just associated with the reptilian brain, and the star is always used in all the various constructs of the matrix. And so when, you know, just alluding back to mortal marriages, you know, when you're faced with Satanism on a regular basis, and you know all the constructs of our society are permeated with satanic elements and imagery, there's no way for a mortal marriage to survive. There's no way. Unless you can unsex yourself, you know, like in Macbeth. You know, if you can unsex yourself, that's different. But if you are male or female, and not androgynous, you will be tempted by Satan, because this whole environment is infused with Satanism, with the 5, you know, senses, with the reptilian brain. They're telling you, just like Jay-Z in his song and his wife's song, you know, Upgrade You. He's saying you're sure to see Saturn. This is high level, not eye level. No. He said you're sure to see stars. This is high level, not eye level. My bezel, courtesy of Audemars. Listen to that. And when he's saying that his bezel is the courtesy of Audemars, right? Am I pronouncing that right? Audemars is an expensive watch. So the Greek god Saturn represents time in the material. So the watch is time, and Audemars, the fact that it's the expensive watch, represents, money. So he's saying that he has taken an embezzlement of mankind, that there has been an embezzlement of mankind based upon Satanism, based upon Saturn. And so when you think about that, not in the union of a mortal marriage, but just from an individual, you are being separated within yourself, within an environment that's infused with Satanism. And so when you get with another person who's separated with Satanism, there's just no foundation for your marriage to survive. You are Israel. You are Isis and Ra, separated by El, which is Satan, or Saturn, material and time. And so, whenever you're trying to put the male and female together from a superficial level on the earth plane, it's like trying to fit a square into a circle. It's just not going to fit. You don't necessarily see this person as an aspect of you. You just see what you can get out of this person. And, I know that, me saying this is like, some people, like if someone were watching this and said, I didn't marry my husband to get something out of them. You don't realize it within yourself. But if you said vows, then you did it to get something out of the deal. It's a deal. That's all it is. Marriage is a deal. If you had vows, then you made a deal. And you said, what, this is the deal. I'm going to be faithful, this, that, and the other, whatever the case is. That isn't necessarily the fundamental love that integrates, if you will. This is a very alien type of love that you agreed to, a synthetic, if you will, type of love that you contracted to having. And so that's why it's so difficult to make mortal marriages work, because mortal marriage is, about, you doing your part. And it's very, if I contract to be faithful to you, but, somebody walks by that's super duper, sexy, if you will, it's like, okay, then there's an unconscious part of me that says, man, I really want that sexy man over there. He's really hot, or whatever the case is. And so I may not even recognize them on a conscious level. Consciously, I may say, whatever, I love my husband and I would never cheat on him. But unconsciously, the unconscious is not biased. It doesn't recognize rules and laws and vows. And so your unconscious is like, yeah, I want him. So, when you go to sleep at night and you're sleeping next to your husband, you have an astral self, whereas you act out the restrictions that you have in the physical. So guess what? When you go to sleep at night and you're next to your spouse, you are having sex and engaging in some type of activity with the man that you saw at the grocery store, at the PTA meeting, whatever the case is. So what I'm trying to get you to see is that there's another aspect to you that you're not familiar with. And so within the constructs of the matrix, you're not going to be able to be faithful in a mortal marriage, either physically or on the astral aspect of you, the astral realm, because, you're always trying to work out a restriction in your unconscious mind. In your conscious mind, you're faithful, which is your spiritual, feminine, etheric, psychological mind. But in your astral, for your astral self, you are just working out those restrictions that you had in the physical, if you will. So, it's, or maybe I got that wrong. Your ego, if you will, is, wedded to being spiritual. But your astral self is wedded to honoring its feelings and what it really wants. And so there's a discrepancy in our world between what we do and what we really want to do, if you will. It's very interesting because I took an excerpt from the book of Romans, and so it really paints a really good picture about just how the mind kind of wrestles, if you will, with itself. We are definitely wrestling within ourselves in a very, just as individuals, if you will. But, when it comes to within a marriage, it's even worse because you've gotten that energy where two people are wrestling within themselves. And it creates a cluster of mess, if you will. So this excerpt I took it out of Romans, if you will. This is Romans 7:15 through 20. And so this paints a really great picture about, what the soul is going through when it's in turmoil between its spiritual and its earthly self. And so it says, I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good, as it is. It is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. For I know good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have a desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out, for I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. And so this is Romans 7:15 through 20. And so right here in this particular scripture, you can see how the soul is in conflict with itself. It wants to live for its wife. It wants to live for God, and honor that aspect of itself. But there's another war within them, which represents the kundalini, as they call it, or the earthly sacral. And so it's the feeling aspect of the body. And so since we're demigods, being within a restriction causes suffering and pain. It causes divorce of superficial marriage. And so, one thing about this book I want you to know is very controversial. From a superficial standpoint, and I can really, because I have a three-dimensional way of looking at information and knowledge. So from a superficial standpoint, yes, what I'm saying is, I'm not really saying that, I guess what you would call, divorce or cheating. Cheating is great. I'm not saying that. But, what am I saying? I'm saying that, yes, marriage and the law of marriage and the institution of marriage is not natural. And that if someone cheats, then that's a natural inclination, if you will, because of the fact that, you're not built to have a restriction within yourself. You're a limitless being. And so it's all about love, if you will. And so if love is, interacting with someone in a way, and then interacting with another person, if you will, and, in that way it would have you, then there's no necessary restrictions with it. Some people will say from a superficial level, well, how will our world look if people are able to, just, copulate and to have relationships with whomever they want? But you have to think of it, people are doing that anyway. People are doing that anyway. They're cheating in their marriages. There's, I had infidelity in my marriage, where my ex-husband cheated on me. A lot. And, people I've heard of, just within my family and friends and so forth. And so, this is not, regardless of the law, nature always wins. Nature always wins. And so unless we learn to honor our nature, we're going to have, in fact, I think that we would probably, be with more people, if you will, or we would, be more promiscuous. We're more promiscuous because of the law. It talks about in the book of Romans how, the law subjugates the soul and it convicts the soul and it makes the soul guilty. When you don't have the restriction and you can have more sovereignty of your life, you live with more integrity. You make a conscious decision. You don't need that Victoria's Secret model. You would make a conscious decision to want to be with her. Like, for example, I've mentioned before, I met a guy at the bar one time, and, he was telling me about his trip to Amsterdam, and he said that he was in the park, what was it called, Vogel Park, or some park in some park in Amsterdam, and he said the women were sunbathing and they had, their breasts out and everything. And he and his friends who are Americans, were like, wow, look at that. They were just all, flabbergasted by seeing the women, with their breast out and just out there just doing their thing. And he said the men, the native men that were out there, just acted as if the women weren't there. And so it goes to show that when you don't have a restriction upon your nature, you really just make conscious decisions. It's like, I don't really need to covet women with their breast out sunbathing. That's just something normal that we do here. It's like, but if you do that in America, a man's like, oh my gosh, it's like, I really want that woman. And the reason why you really want that woman is because of a restriction. It's a restriction, it's the law that subjugates you and that makes and entices you to, do things that you normally wouldn't do. So the restriction makes you, live for your husband. In other words, live for Adam, live for the material. You're living for your sexual nature as opposed to, living for, just making a conscious decision about the way that you want to live your life. In places like Amsterdam, they probably have less STDs and, less, sex-related crimes and things like that because people can, do what they want. They can, get a prostitute if they want or what have you. I'm not saying that I'm condoning that, but what I'm saying is that when you can do something, you don't want to do it. It makes perfect sense. It's like if you tell someone, don't do that, they want to do it more. If you're like, yeah, you can do it. It's like, really, I can? Well, shoot, I don't really want to do it anymore. Or if I do it, it's like, okay, I really wanted to. It wasn't like it was a desire that I had to fulfill. And so, I really just wanted to point that out when it comes to marriage and how marriage deals with the law and the law itself, going back to the book of Romans and reading that chapter, excellent chapter to read in the Bible. It really tells you that the law convicts you. The law convicts you. And so, we're so convicted in our physical with everything that it causes us to have such a restriction that we have to act it out on the astral plane. And for me in particular, I'm very much a sick being on the astral plane, under having been restricted for so many lifetimes. I'm really filthy, really filthy, and just, debased, sexually filthy. So sexually filthy, materialistic, if you will, very materialistic and, filthy rich. I'm filthy rich on the astral plane. And so, because of that, because of my restrictions in the physical, this is how I am on the astral. And so, you could say I'm one of the sickest, if you will, one of the sickest on the astral plane. So, definitely want to shed light on the institution of marriage, the law itself, the restriction, what it does to the superficial, aspect of what we consider marriage, and also looking at the occult aspect of marriage, which is really about the mind. Once you connect the mind together with Christ, then, you can live in integrity. You don't have the restrictions anymore, so you make more conscious decisions. So many people, they marry people because of unconscious decisions. Like me, I got married because of an unconscious decision. I really had poor role models and, just poor images of what, men were, black men in particular. And so I saw my ex-husband as a way to redeem the black man that I had come to know as a little girl, seeing my dad growing up and, seeing how black men were portrayed in the media. And, I just really saw him as my ticket out to say, well, I really love this man. And, he's going to be an attorney someday and we're going to have a wonderful, life and have the American dream and that type of thing. So, when it didn't pan out that way, I was really angry at him. But, when my third eye opened, I really came to understand that I really was I didn't marry him. My id married him. My inner child did. And that was not necessarily on a superficial level. That was not fair to him. And so, although superficially it did not, register, if you will, innately as human beings, we're connected. We're connected, and although we don't superficially say things, or things don't come into consciousness, the unconscious aspect of you connects to someone else, and so he could really feel that, I suppose, within me. He could really feel that that this was an aspect of me that he was looking to him to redeem, or whatever, a wound that I had that needed to be healed. And so, because he's a being that can feel that, there's also a resistance, if you will, to that. There's a resistance. And so we're all living unconsciously. We're all living, making decisions based upon things that we don't really realize until a light shines, and our pineal gland opens, our third eye opens, and we're like, wow, that's why I did this, that's why I did that. And so you don't really realize and recognize it. And so, in this chapter, I end it with a movie. Actually, it's talking about a movie. It's called Something Borrowed. And so this movie is an excellent representation of, it looks like superficial marriage on the surface, but really it's a movie about holy matrimony of the mind, of the right and left brain, and how Christ is supposed to actually unite the mind together. But Satan always gets in the way of it. And so I'm just going to read you an excerpt from my book about the movie, because it's a whole lot to explain. I was like, how am I going to explain all this stuff? But if you've seen Something Borrowed, you get the gist of what the movie is about. But the movie, really just shows the difference between Isis and Ra, or Adam and Eve, and Satan, or El. So in the excerpt, I said, since the elite hide much of their occult information in cinema, the movie Something Borrowed is an excellent film that paints a picture of the occult meaning of marriage. From a superficial standpoint, it looks like a typical chick flick, but underneath it is layered with information regarding the human psyche and how it is separated into the left and right mind, which has given rise to Satanism, the worship of the material. The protagonist is named Rachel, an attorney who is often overshadowed by her best friend Darcy. Darcy, who is more inclined to having fun and the finer things in life, piques the interest of Rachel's friend Dexter, and Dexter is enamored with Darcy since she has the spice of life that he and Rachel do not share. Consequently, he begins dating Darcy, although he and Rachel secretly love each other. Dexter and Rachel have never grounded their desire for one another due to various circumstances, but when they discover the passion that lies beneath the exterior of their platonic relationship, it causes a rift between Dexter and Darcy that prevents them from getting married at the end of the film. Instead, he pursues a relationship with Rachel, who he originally loved in the first place. And so, this may seem very far-fetched, but the character Rachel symbolizes Jesus, the Son, or the Son of God, and God is Darcy, the now debased earthly aspect of Rachel, who only cares about sex, partying, and shopping. Darcy is Satan. Rachel and Darcy are one, but they live in separation, making them polarized opposites of one another. Until they are brought together, Rachel will always live in Darcy's shadow, but something peculiar happens at Rachel's birthday party. Rachel bumps her head under a table while trying to retrieve Darcy's Chanel purse. At that moment, she begins to embody her Darcy alter ego and becomes more acquainted with Dexter. Dexter can be seen as Adam, symbolizing the body, which is the vessel for manifesting desire. And so by taking on the persona of Darcy, Rachel assumes a more active approach of pursuing her desire with Dexter. Rachel bumping her head and embodying her friend signifies she had a psychological split between the mind and spirit that is now being bridged since she now has access to Darcy within her psyche. Until her head was bumped, she could not find connection with her unconscious mind. Alluding back to Genesis, it states that God places angels around the tree of life with flaming swords to guard it against Adam and Eve attaining immortality and everlasting life. This is also depicted in the movie when Rachel decides to synchronize with Darcy's personality and gravitate towards Dexter. And so, basically, we see that, there's a connection, if you will, a triangle between, between Dexter and, Darcy and Rachel. Like I said, Rachel is the son, whereas Dexter is, is Adam, if you will, he is the material, whereas Darcy is the id, or the inner child, or Satan. She represents, this unconscious astral self of Rachel. And so, Darcy's is Rachel's astral. And so in the movie we see Rachel's friend Ethan is like her voice of reason, so he would be considered the Christ. And so there's a point in the movie where Ethan tries to, do away with the whole triangle between Rachel, Darcy, and Dexter, because he sees how it's destroying the son. It's destroying Rachel. And so he tries to bring truth to, dissipate illusions or delusions, whatever you want to call it, in the movie. So, I'm not going to get a whole lot into it because there's a lot. It's very deep. But I'll let you go ahead and read that in the book, but how it shows that Satanism separates us from ourselves. And if we don't actually, bring the two to one, then, it will, we'll never be able to experience life in its fullness, and we'll always keep reincarnating back because of some type of desire, because Satan disintegrates and Christ integrates. And so the Trinity is supposed to be, the healthy Trinity is, Adam and Eve and Christ, but the unhealthy Trinity is Adam and Eve and Satan, or Israel. Israel. And so I know people are like, oh, wow, what is she saying? The Jews are, Satanist, or whatever the case is. No, what I'm saying is Israel is a lineage, whereas people are separated by Satan or Saturn. The left and right brain is separated. If you go back to the Bible and the Israelites, they were in bondage. Why were they in bondage? Because they were separated by Satan. When I think it was Moses, going back to the book, I can't remember what book it is offhand, but, he's telling them, like, take off all your jewelry and stuff like that, and, turn away from graven images and things like that, because the people there had become totally dominated by Satan, by Saturn, by the Greek god of the material. So he says, this is your God, if you will. And so Christ is supposed to be where Satan is. So this is supposed to be Christ. The pineal gland is supposed to be where Christ resides. But it does not reside there because this is satanic, because this is in a devolved state. And so the environment that we live in actually creates an unholy trinity, unholy matrimony. It disintegrates. And so when this is in balance and we're not focused on the creation, but we're focusing on the creator, which is the mind. Essentially, it's the mind. We have false creators of this matrix reality, but the mind is supposed to be the creator, the divinity that creates the divine. But we're always bombarded with the divine. We're always bombarded with stuff. When we look at TV, we're bombarded with stuff. When we listen to music, we're bombarded with sex, and we're bombarded with money, and all, even our churches. My mom, she's very much about, church and stuff like that, and watching these televangelist people, what have you, and they focus on all blessings are about Satan, the 666, the body, heal my body, I'm sick, or, something like, I need a monetary, blessing, I need money for this, or what have you. This is all 666 stuff. This is all, the temple of God. The temple of God is a perversion. The church is a perversion. In this particular lifetime, I'm playing the avatar of taking on the synagogue of Satan. You know, that's my avatar. And so when I look at the, if you will, the perversion of the church and how it focuses, you know, how, you know, instead of taking it to the mind, which is which really manifests things, is taken away, and we look at the creation itself. And so we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to look within instead of looking without. But this whole matrix system is intended for us to look without, so we don't look within. And so, you know, I'm just here to expose that and expose what real marriage is about, and how, you know, when you're looking to a man or a woman, like I did to a man in this case, you know, this time around, to actually fulfill me and make me whole. You know, I wish I should have been looking within myself, but no one ever told me this. No one ever taught me this in school. You know, no one taught me this at church. You know, no one taught me this on TV. No one taught me this. You know, and no one taught me how to live a fulfilling life and to really know that I'm the only one who can make me happy. So, you know, this ends all of my videos, if you will. This is the last video. This is the last chapter in the book. And, you know, I'm just looking forward to dialoguing with people about, you know, this book. I think that it's a revolutionary book. I'm not saying that because I wrote it, you know, but, and really, to be honest with you, I know it's very difficult to really explain in very layman's terms, but this ego, you know, didn't necessarily write it. You know, this is information that is from, you know, locked away within my DNA that wrote it. And so, you know, and even in writing this book, and even in editing it, you know, because I self-edited it, so there might be mistakes here and there, but and it's an ebook, it's not a physical book, so, you know, it's a book that you have to read online. But, you know, I really was amazed at what I was writing, and I was learning as I was writing. I was learning as I was writing. And so it goes to show that there's different aspects of ourselves. We don't just have a right and left brain, and you know, we have the Christ. And so the Christ, the one that observes duality, wrote this. You know, it is the Christ consciousness that wrote this book. And so that aspect of me wrote it. So, you know, it goes to show that, you know, in my experience, how there are just different layers and aspects to me that I didn't really know were there. And so, you know, there's unconscious aspects of us. And so I'm so happy that this part of me loved me enough to be conscious enough for me to finish it. So, and to write this truth. So, you know, thank you guys for, you know, tuning in. And, you know, you can look in the comment section to purchase the book if you're interested. And I would say, you know, I'll see you in my next video. But, you know, this is the last video. So thanks, guys, for your support.